For more than 60 years, the world has been captivated by a walking contradiction, a man who was part truth, part legend, a sinner who sang gospel songs, and a rebel who quoted scripture. The world knew him as Johnny Cash, but there was another name, a name whispered in the cotton fields of Dyess, Arkansas, long before the roaring applause and the prison concerts. That name was J.R., and only one man could really tell the story of both sides. The man who stood in his shadow, shared his blood, and carried the scars of his love and his fury. His younger brother Tommy. For decades, Tommy Cash lived a life right. Alongside the legend, he built his own career and sang his own songs. But the question was always there. What was it really like? Now, in what would be his final, most honest reflections, at 84 years old, Tommy Cash is finally opening up. He's not just sharing memories, he's settling a lifetime of them. Before the long black coat and the gravelly "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash" that became his signature, he was just a boy named J.R. Cash, born in the middle of the Great Depression in Kingsland, Arkansas. He was raised in a 5-room house in a government colony for struggling families, Dyess, Arkansas, a place built on cotton, sweat, and church. J.R. was one of 7 children, and the youngest, Tommy, came along 8 years after him, to a little boy growing up in the flat, tough landscape of the Arkansas Delta. An older brother can feel like a giant, and J.R. was no different. Tommy watched him, learned from him, and looked up to him with that pure innocence you only have in childhood. Their world was small, defined by endless rows of cotton, church on Sunday, and the music that always filled their home. Their mother, Carrie, was the family's musical heart, filling the house with hymns and folk songs that got into the bones of all her children. But it was J.R. who took that music and made it his. Tommy remembered seeing his older brother, hands still rough from farm work, pick up a guitar. In those moments, he wasn't just a brother, he was a ticket to another world. A world far away from the back-breaking labor and the dust of the cotton fields. That one sentence says it all. Before the fame, before the chaos, Johnny Cash was, to his little brother, an inspiration. Tommy would watch, totally mesmerized, as J.R. found melodies that seemed to speak for their hard life. The music was honest, it was raw, it was who they were, but their childhood wasn't all songs and sunshine. It was marked by a tragedy so deep that it would follow Johnny Cash for his entire life, shaping the sorrow and struggle in his music. In 1944, their beloved older brother, Jack, died in a terrible accident, nearly cut into by a table saw at a local mill. Jack was the steady one, the deeply religious one, the one their father Ray had pinned all his hopes on. J.R. had gone fishing that day. He carried the guilt of that accident, the weight of his father's grief, and a new darkness settled inside him. He was only 12 years old. Tommy was just 4, too young to really get it, but not too young to feel the world shift under his feet. The house got quieter, his father got harder, and J.R., the brother he looked up to, started carrying a pain that would never really go away. This was the J.R. that Tommy knew, a boy who sang about love and God, but whose eyes held a deep, unshakable sadness, a boy who would soon leave the cotton fields for good, armed with a guitar, a suitcase full of personal songs, and a desperate need to be heard. When Johnny joined the Air Force, it was their first real separation. He sent letters home, but he was gone. When he came back, he wasn't just J.R. anymore. He was married, with a new confidence and a fire in his gut. He moved to Memphis, and the world was about to meet Johnny Cash. For Tommy, still a teenager back in Arkansas, his brother was becoming more than a local hero. He was becoming a star. In 1956, at one of Johnny's early concerts, Tommy found a way to be part of this new, electric world. He started selling pictures of his brother at the shows. It was a way to make some cash, sure, but it was really about staying close, about feeling the heat from the rising sun that was Johnny Cash. He made a few $100s that night, fortune for a kid from Dyess, but the real prize was being near the magic. He was no longer just the little brother. He was connected to the phenomenon. He was the brother of the man who sang Folsom Prison Blues and I Walk the Line, songs that were climbing the charts and grabbing the nation's attention. The admiration was pure. The pride was huge. From the dusty fields of Dyess to the buzzing concert halls of the 50s, Tommy Cash saw his brother as a hero. But as the spotlight on Johnny got brighter, it started to cast a long, dark shadow. And in that shadow, the brother Tommy admired was slowly terrifyingly, changing into someone he didn't recognize. Memphis in the 1950s was a hotbed of new sounds. It was the birth of rock and roll, a rebellious mix of country, blues, and gospel. And at the center of it all was a small studio called Sun Records. This is where J.R. Cash, the farm boy, walked in and became Johnny Cash, the icon. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Carl Perkins, the $1 Million Quartet. They were young, hungry, and about to change everything. For Tommy, watching from the sidelines, it must have been like seeing a rocket take off. Johnny's records weren't just hits, they were anthems. I Walk the Line shot to #1 on the country charts and even cracked the pop top 20. He was the first Sun artist to release a full album. His sound, with that chugging, train-like rhythm from the Tennessee 3, was like nothing else. Fame hit like a tidal wave. It meant constant interviews, TV shows, and a relentless tour, schedules sometimes 300 shows a year. For Tommy, still living a mostly normal life, the change was jarring. Suddenly, the brother he knew belonged to everyone. The inside jokes and shared memories now seemed less important than the myth being built around the man in black. Tommy once talked about this shift with a painful clarity. The simple things people used to ask him about started to disappear, replaced by one single topic: Tommy Cash audio clip. People stopped asking me about my girlfriends and my cotton picking and my basketball, and they started asking about Johnny. It was a subtle change, but it shifted his whole world. He wasn't just Tommy Cash anymore. He was Johnny Cash's little brother. The shadow he was standing in was getting longer and colder, and as Johnny's star rose, a darkness started to creep in. The pressure of the road was crushing. The endless travel, the lonely hotel rooms, the demand to be Johnny Cash every single night, it was a heavy weight to carry. To cope, Johnny and his band found a dangerous answer: amphetamines, pills to get them up and keep them going, and barbiturates to bring them back down. In a 1997 interview, Johnny put it bluntly: "I was taking the pills for a while, and then the pills started taking me." This was the start of the rift. The brother Tommy had admired was now in a fight with a chemical demon, and it was twisting him into someone volatile and unpredictable. The sadness planted in his soul by his brother Jack's death was now being fed by a toxic mix of fame, pressure, and drugs. The public image of the man in black was taking shape. He said he wore the color for the poor and the prisoners. It was a powerful symbol. But behind the scenes, the darkness was much uglier. It was the darkness of addiction. His behavior grew erratic. He started missing shows. His first marriage, to Vivian Liberto, was falling apart. Then, in 1965, he was arrested for trying to smuggle amphetamines across the Mexican border in his guitar case for his family. The stories that got back to them were terrifying. This wasn't the JR they knew. This was a stranger, possessed by a rage they couldn't understand. Tommy, who had followed his brother into music and was starting his own career, had a front row seat to the implosion. The admiration he once felt was now mixed with a deep, gut-wrenching fear. He loved his brother, his childhood hero, but he was becoming terrified of the man the world was meeting, this chaotic, self-destructive force. The bond they had built in the cotton fields of Arkansas was stretching to its breaking point. The crack had become a canyon, and on the other side was a version of his brother that Tommy was starting to think might be lost for good. The worst was still to come. The story of the Cash brothers has incredible highs and devastating lows. It's a journey into the heart of fame, family, and the fight for redemption. If you're hooked on this, look into one of music's most complex legacies. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're heading deeper into the storm, into the years when Tommy Cash was terrified his brother wouldn't survive another week. And you won't want to miss how this story turns around. The late 1960s should have been Johnny Cash's peak. By some accounts, he was outselling the Beatles. He had his own hit TV show on ABC, where he introduced the world to artists like Bob Dylan and Louis Armstrong. He was a cultural powerhouse, a voice for the voiceless, especially after his legendary 1968 performance at Folsom Prison. He was at the absolute top of his game. But for Tommy and the rest of the family, these years were a nightmare. The man on TV.com, charismatic, in total control, was an illusion. The man behind the scenes was a prisoner to his addictions, and his behavior was spiraling into terrifying new levels of violence and paranoia. Tommy wasn't just hearing stories anymore. He was living through the storm. While trying to build his own career in Nashville, he was in the direct path of Hurricane Johnny. The fear wasn't a distant worry. It was a daily reality. When he spoke of this time, you could still hear the dread in his voice decades later. Imagine that fear. This isn't some celebrity you read about in a magazine. This is your brother, the person you grew up with, and you're watching him systematically destroy himself and everything around him. The outbursts became legendary for all the wrong reasons. In 1965, his camper truck caught fire and started a massive forest fire in California that wiped out nearly a whole flock of 53 endangered condors. When he went to court, he was shockingly unremorseful. He was arrested again in Georgia in 1967. With a bag full of pills, he was a man coming apart in public, but the chaos behind closed doors was even worse. For Tommy, that chaos hit home in the most violent way possible. He had set up his own music business office in Nashville. It was a symbol of his own hard-won independence, his sanctuary. One day, that sanctuary was destroyed by the very person who inspired him to build it. In a drug-fueled rage, Johnny stormed into Tommy's office and completely wrecked it. He smashed furniture, shattered glass, and tore the place apart. The physical damage was immense, but the emotional damage was so much worse. This was a brother turning on a brother, an idol smashing his admirer's world. But it got worse. The violence, once aimed at objects, was eventually aimed at Tommy himself. In what had to be the most painful moment of their lives, during another drug-crazed episode, Johnny hit his younger brother. Just let that sink in. The physical blow was nothing compared to the betrayal. It was the ultimate violation of that brotherly bond, where love and fear crashed together in one traumatic moment. The hero of his childhood had become a physical threat. Tommy later said that somehow, despite these awful incidents, they stayed close, as sign of a love that just refused to die, even when faced with that kind of darkness. During this time, Tommy was fighting his own battles. He was struggling with alcohol, a different demon, but from the same family of pain. He understood the pull of the abyss. But Johnny's addiction was a raging fire, burning not just him but everyone who got too close. The family felt helpless. They watched the man in black become a ghost, his thin frame and wild temper a constant worry. He was a man who sang about redemption while living in sin, a man who spoke for prisoners while trapped in a prison of his own making. For Tommy, living in the shadow of this storm was all about survival. He had to balance his love for JR, the brother he knew, with his fear of the monster Johnny had become. He had to protect himself and his own family while praying his brother could be saved. The question wasn't if Johnny would hit bottom, but whether there'd be anything left of him when he finally did. No storm lasts forever. For Johnny Cash, the hurricane of addiction that had raged for nearly a decade finally started to break. But he didn't find his way out of the darkness on his own. He was guided by a lighter woman who was every bit his equal, June Carter. Johnny and June had known each other for years, ever since meeting backstage at the Grand Ole Opry in 1956. He was a rising star, and she was country music royalty from the legendary Carter family. They had an instant, undeniable connection that both of them, married to other people, tried to fight. June later described the feeling with a line that would become famous in song. It was like a ring of fire. She co-wrote the hit song Ring of Fire, perfectly capturing the dangerous, all-consuming nature of their love. For years, they toured together, their duets on stage sizzling with attention and affection everyone could see. June saw the good man inside Johnny, the JRO who was drowning in pills. She was also scared by his addiction, but her love for him and her deep faith pushed her to do something. The turning point, as the story goes, came after Johnny wandered into Nickajack Cave in Tennessee, high on drugs, seemingly to lie down and die. Instead, he said he felt the presence of God and found the strength to walk out. Waiting for him were June and his mother. Whether that story is 100% factual or not, the core of it is true. With June's help, Johnny began the painful process of getting clean. She and her family moved into his house for a month, nursing him through the brutal withdrawals and shielding him from his demons. Johnny always gave her the credit. He said, "She has saved my life more than once. She's always been there, with her love." In 1968, on stage in Ontario, Canada, Johnny stopped the show and proposed to June right there. She said yes. They were married a week later. Their marriage wasn't a fairy tale cure. Their relationship had plenty of its own struggles, but it was the anchor Johnny desperately needed. In his final interviews, Tommy Cash would call their bond the greatest love story I ever witnessed. He saw how they became each other's strengths, how they became one. For Tommy, seeing his brother find this kind of salvation was an answer to years of prayers. Tommy believed June's love changed everything. He said she helped him overcome his drug abuse. Their love was so strong, it made Johnny want to become the best man he could possibly be for her. As Johnny began to heal, so did his relationship with his family. The rage faded, replaced by a clarity and humility that had been gone for years. The JR that Tommy remembered started to reappear from the wreckage. Rebuilding that trust was a slow process, and a huge part of it came, fittingly, through music. In 1976, Johnny invited Tommy to join him on a major bicentennial tour. This was a big deal. It wasn't just a guest spot. They played about 120 shows together, crisscrossing the country side by side, on those tour buses, in those dressing rooms, and on those stages. The two brothers found each other again. They weren't just the legend and his little brother anymore. They were musicians, collaborators, and family. This healing was mirrored in Tommy's own life. While Johnny was finding his way back from drugs with June's help, Tommy was on his own journey. He eventually confronted his struggle with alcohol and got sober, a commitment he kept for decades. The two brothers, who had walked similar paths into addiction, now found themselves on similar paths to redemption, grounded in the same faith and family values they grew up with. The storm had passed. The fear that had defined their relationship for so long was replaced by a hard-won peace. Tommy had his brother back from the brink. The man the world met was finally starting to look like the brother Tommy had always loved. The last decades of Johnny Cash's life were a testament to his strength. His career had its ups and downs, but in the 1990s, he had an incredible comeback with his American Recordings series, produced by Rick Rubin. These albums stripped his music down to its raw, emotional core. His voice, now weathered by age and hardship, had a new weight to it, a deep sense of wisdom and mortality. His cover of Hurt by 9 Inch Nails, released just before he died, became his final, haunting confession from a man who had lived a life of immense pain and incredible grace. Through it all, his bond with June was the foundation of his life. They were married for 35 years. Their son, John Carter Cash, said his father never ceased to remind my mother of his love for her. For her 65th birthday, Johnny wrote to her, "We got old and got used to each other. But once in a while, like today, I meditate on it and realize how lucky I am to share my life with the greatest woman I ever met." In May 2003, June Carter Cash passed away. Johnny was frail, heartbroken, and completely devastated. He had lost his anchor. 4 months later, on September 12, 2003, Johnny Cash died. Many believe he died of a broken heart. As Tommy would later sing in a tribute, "The night we lost June Carter, my brother lost his wife." In the years after Johnny's death, Tommy Cash became a vital keeper of his brother's legacy. He was a living link to the man behind the myth. He performed tribute concerts and released albums like A Tribute to My Brother. These weren't just cover albums. They were a way for a younger brother to keep honoring, understanding, and talking to the giant who had shaped his world. Through his music and interviews, Tommy gave us a perspective no one else could. He gave us JR. He reminded the world that, before the legend, there was a poor boy from Arkansas with a farmer's hands. He spoke about the complex truth, without judgment, acknowledging the deep wounds, while celebrating the profound love. He showed us the full picture, the saint and the sinner, the father, the husband, and to him, the brother. In his final years, Tommy Cash's story was one of peace. He had outlived the brother he once feared wouldn't make it through the week. He had finally reconciled the two men in his mind, the brother he admired and the man who terrified him. He understood they were one and the same, two sides of a coin forged in tragedy, fame, and a lifelong search for grace. Tommy Cash passed away on September 13, 2024, at the age of 84, almost 21 years to the day after his iconic brother. He left this world a respected musician, a husband, a father, and the last living brother of the Man in Black. But maybe his greatest legacy is the truth he carried, and the story he finally told. The story of a brother's lover, loved that, survived the storm and lived to see the sun rise again. The story of Tommy and Johnny Cash is a powerful reminder that even our biggest legends are, in the end, human. They're sons, fathers, and brothers, shaped by the same joys and sorrows that shape all of us. Tommy's honesty gives us a deeper, more complete picture of the man in black and the brother who walked beside him. What part of the Cash legacy resonates most with you? Is it the story,